Good
Good
afternoon,
af-
everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for today's Leaders Initiative seminar. My name is Stephanie, and I'll be kind of moderating things here on the back end. I will be sending out a Qualtrics evaluation at the end of this talk, so please take time to fill it out. And I'll also send a follow-up email later on today. We will have one poll question during this talk today. It'll pop up and you can pick the answer that you would like, and we can add some discussion to that. And with that, I'll turn things over to Courtney, and she'll do our introduction for our speaker today.
Thanks so much, Stephanie. So we're excited today to welcome Dr. Norman Scheel as our speaker this month. He's an assistant professor in the Department of Radiology at Michigan State University. His research in neuroimaging and data science focuses on brain function and cognitive decline, particularly in aging and Alzheimer's disease. Currently, he collaborates on NIH-funded clinical trials focused on the interplay between cardiovascular health and neurodegenerative biomarkers. And with that, I'll hand it over to Dr. Scheel.
Thank you so much, Stephanie and Courtney, for the nice introduction. Let me share my screen and then we're off. All right, so today I'm going to talk about comparison of T2 FLAIR white matter hyperintensity segmentation algorithms in clinical trials. So as just a short outline about my talk, I'm going to start out with some background, then with the clinical trials I'm working on, then the segmentation algorithms I picked for a comparison, some preliminary results, and quite a lot of challenges for the future directions that we had. So for the background, white matter hyperintensities are hyperintense regions within the brain's white matter observed on T2 weighted fluid attenuated inversion recovery FLAIR magnetic resonance imaging. So you can see them here. So white matter hyperintensities are considered a potential biomarker of cerebral small vessel disease, and a greater white matter hyperintensity burden has been associated with an increased risk of cognitive dysfunction and stroke. So how do we define and find those? Because there are lots of things that kind of look similar, but are not actual white matter hyperintensity. So in diffusion weighted, if you have like a very sharp pronounced hyperintensity like that, that's probably more a small subcortical infarct, while white matter hyperintensity on FLAIR images kind of look like this. Typically, so sometimes we also see lacunes, which are hypointense right here. And then we've got the perivascular spaces that kind of look like elongated like this. And in T2 star images, like these dark spots, hypointensities that we see here are cerebral microbleeds. And this paper from Wardlaw from 2018 kind of gives a really nice overview about all of these different sequences and what kind of contrast changes you see. So overall, we're looking at white matter hyperintensities that are around the ventricles, like this here in yellow. We call these periventricular white matter hyperintensities, and then there are these more focal, smaller regions in what we call deep white matter hyperintensities. And this shaded area around is typically the distribution we see them growing over time. Now, if you have a lacune over here, we also sometimes see like a cap that forms on top of it. So if you go back to this image right here, so you can see the clear border of the white matter hyperintensities around the lacune, and this kind of cap forming over here. And of course, there is a progression. So this is very, very mild, where you just see these smaller portions around here, moderate, severe, and very severe white matter hyperintensities. And we know now that with aging, the amount of white matter hyperintensities in the brain increase. And this really nice review article compared data from over 19,040 subjects. And if we look at the relative risk ratio, the overall risk ratio for cognitive impairment and all-cause dementia is around at 1.14. So it's a little bit elevated. But if we look at the subgroups right here into cognitive impairment, overall, there were 2,500 subjects roughly, and the relative risk ratio already rises to 1.27. And if we then look at the subgroup of the all-cause dementia overall, it's a relative risk ratio of 1.12, which is a little bit elevated. But then if we divide this into Alzheimer's disease and vascular dementia, we can clearly see that those white matter hyperintensities have a huge 1.73 relative risk ratio for vascular dementia. And then if we look at what kind of metric was used, the continuous scale, looking at actual volumes in milliliters or cubic millimeters, the relative risk ratio is at 1.04, which is basically no real effect. But if we then look at presence versus absence, the range gets a lot higher, and the median is at 1.49. High versus low is also, and max versus min is also really high. So this kind of is interesting because you would think that a continuous scale of volume should also be highly correlated, but that might just speak to some imperfections in our current segmentation algorithms. So that's why we need to do a lot more work to figure this one out. And then if we look at the location of the white matter hyperintensities, the periventricular hyperintensities have a much higher relative risk ratio than the deep white matter hyperintensities. Now, I would caution this result to just discard the deep white matter hyperintensities, because as we see we will see current white matter hyperintensity segmentation algorithms have a big problem segmenting deep white matter hyperintensities. So how do we do the segmentation of the white matter hyperintensities? So doing it manually, of really going in and drawing all the different little tiny spots in the brain is very laborious. And so already in 2004, the IDEA Lab from UC Davis, around the group of Charles DeCarli, developed this algorithm, which they call the White Matter Hyperintensity Kit, the UCD White Matter Hyperintensity Kit. And it was released in this first paper in 2005 in Stroke. And that was, to my knowledge, one of the very, very first algorithms to do the white matter hyperintensity segmentations. And they're actually, for the time being, really advanced. If you think 2005, loading a FLAIR image just into the RAM of your computer would have been difficult already. So that's 20 years ago, and it's quite impressive that what they were able to do already at that time. Now, a big jump in 2016, there was the introduction of Bianca from the FMRIB at Oxford, and this is a semi-automated segmentation algorithm where you have to manually retrain the algorithm on your data to do the segmentation, because in the background it just runs basically a k-means algorithm. And also in 2016, there was the release of the lesion prediction algorithm in the lesion segmentation toolbox in the SPM package for MATLAB from the University College of London. So it was it was developed by Paul Schmidt in his dissertation at the Ludwig-Maximilians-Universität München in Germany. And this algorithm kind of became the standard for segmentation of white matter hyperintensities in general, because it was very robust and was able to work with lots of different images, and you didn't have to pre-train it. A lot of people started using this one following its release. But in 2017, the Medical Imaging Computing and Computer-Assisted Intervention Society, also called MICI, they created a challenge to rank algorithm performance in segmentation of white matter hyperintensity using automated algorithms. And so they provided a training data set of 60 subjects with heavy white matter hyperintensity burden across 3 different sites and 5 scanners. And they consisted of T1 volumetric and 2D multi-slice T2 FLAIR images that were manually delineated by experts. And this segmentation challenge was concluded in December 2022. So what we got from it was this list of 57 different segmentation algorithms that were predominantly based on deep learning. Because of that, they should be superior to the classical approaches, because deep learning has if it comes to segmentation, that's kind of like the prime example for deep learning. And so we got this whole list. Now I'm switching gears a little bit to the clinical trials that I'm currently working on, or was working on over the last 6 years. So the main trial is the RAD trial, Risk Reduction for Alzheimer's Disease. And this is a multi-center study that looks at what's good for the heart is good for the brain. And we're testing strategies that may reduce the risk of Alzheimer's disease in individuals that are at high risk. So they are in the age group of 60 to 85 years old. They have hypertension, but are otherwise healthy, but have a family history of dementia, like a sibling or a parent, or concerns about their memory. We have 4 arms of intervention over a time span of 2 years. So those 4 arms are rigorous aerobic exercise, then intensive medical management of blood pressure and cholesterol, and the combination of these 2. And the 4th one is just the standard care. Our testing sites are at the University of Texas in Dallas, then the University of Kansas Alzheimer's Disease Center, then the Louisiana State University in Pennington, and the Washington University School of Medicine in St. Louis. So across these different sites, we have 5 scanners, and we do an MRI scan before and after intervention. All scans are then transformed here to MSU, where I pre-processed and visually checked all of these images. So at the University of Texas, we have a Philips Achieva 3 Tesla 32-channel head coil scanner and a GE MR750W with a 3 Tesla and a 24-channel head coil. So we had to use 2 scanners at University of Texas because the Philips Achieva was just completely overbooked and we wouldn't have been able to scan all of our subjects. So that's why we had to add the 2nd scanner here. Then at the Pennington Biomedical Research Center, we have a GE MR750W, 3 Tesla, also a 30-channel head coil. KU has the Siemens Skyra 3 Tesla, also 30-channel head coil, and WashU has the Siemens Prisma 3 Tesla 32-channel head coil. Our imaging protocol was homogenized across the different sites, and of course starts with T1 MPRH anatomical. We did functional imaging. We did arterial spin labeling for perfusion, diffusion weighted imaging for fiber tracking, and diffusion tensor imaging. Then, of course, we have a 2D axial T2 FLAIR sequence without fat saturation. for detecting white matter hyperintensities. And then we have T2 star for diagnosing the microbleeds, and PC2D to measure blood flow. So in total, we have about 500 first time point scans and about 400 second time point scans. So scanning started in 2017 and concluded in 2021. So those are already a lot of scans. But in addition, we have a smaller clinical trial, which is called the HYPAC trial, hypertension, intracranial pulsatility, and brain amyloid beta accumulation in older adults. And the goal is to determine if lowering blood pressure alters brain pulsatility and reduces brain amyloid beta protein accumulation in older adults. So this is a population of 84 subjects, which are either normotensive or hypertensive. Their ages 55 to 79, and they were all scanned on the 3T-GE MR750W at the University of Texas. For this study, we have a 3D T2 FLAIR sequence with fat saturation, and we just recently concluded the scanning of this study as well. Now, since the MICHI white matter hyperintensity challenge concluded, we also have the holdout test data set for the challenge, and that gives us data of an additional 110 scans. All of them are 2D axial T2 FLAIR images. And of these 110, 30 are without fat saturations from Philip Suchiva at the UMC Utrecht. And 80 scans were acquired with fat saturation. So these 80 scans were from the NUHS Singapore, provided 30 scans on a Siemens Trio TIM. And the VU in Amsterdam provided 30 scans from this 3T-GE Signa. 10 scans were from 3T Philips Ingenuity, and 10 scans were from 1.5 Tesla GE Signa. So overall, our two clinical trials, the test data set from the white matter hyperintensity challenge comprises data from over 700 subjects across 10 different scanners and a range of different scanning protocols. And if we look at the average images right here, so this one is the average image of the MICHI white matter hyperintensity challenge scans with fat saturation on. And this is the average of our HYPAC fat saturation 3D FLAIR image. This is the average from the MICHI white matter hyperintensity challenge with fat saturation off. And this is the average from our RAD study. So on the first glance, you can see those average images are very, very comparable. But there are some small changes here. For instance, if you look at the HYPAC image, there's clearly a lot less burden of white matter hyperintensity in these subjects compared to the challenge subjects. And we noticed this effect in the frontal regions of the gray matter being hyperintense a lot stronger than in the challenge. So we attribute this to a coil effect, with the coil being very close to the frontal regions. And if we look at the fat saturation off scans, again, even our RAD subjects are lower burden. You can slightly see this in the different contrasts right here. Now, the question is, which segmentation algorithms do we choose for the comparison? Because we have so many, we cannot just run all of them. So first of all, let's look at the MICHI white matter hyperintensity segmentation challenge, and there we chose 3 of the best performing. So we had to choose the ones that supported CPU-only computation, because at that time, we didn't really have access to GPU clusters. Right now we do, but at the time when I did the comparison, also I wanted to have it in a way that other people that do not have GPU access can also recreate this. So we chose, of course, PGS, which was ranked #1 in the challenge. Cysomedia 2 ranked number 2 in the challenge. And then we chose the FMRIP TrueNet, which was ranked 17. There was a big jump because most of them needed to use GPU computation. And we also deliberately chose the FMRIP algorithm because it had some more anatomical information in it, which we thought was a very good idea. So we just wanted to compare that one as well. So each algorithm consisted of an ensemble approach to a fully convolutional network with a UNet architecture. So pretty standard deep learning. And if we look at PGS, that was created by Gilson Park and colleagues from the Hanyang University in Seoul, South Korea, where they use T2 FLAIR and T1 images as a 2-channel input. And they have an approach where they use highlighted foreground within every 2 convolutional layers of the network. And they use a multi-scale soft dice loss. And they have an ensemble of 5 networks that are trained and shuffled batches of averages. And looking at Cysomedia 2, this was created by Hongwei Li and Björn Menze at the Technical University of Munich. And so they also have T2 FLAIR and T1 as a multi-input. And here they replace the traditional convolution within each layer with a convolution stack of 5 different layers to calculate the dice loss. And here they trained an ensemble of 4 networks of shuffled batches and averages. And coming to the FMRIP TrueNet 2, we chose that one was introduced by Vanati Sundaresan, Mark Jenkinson, and Ludovica Grifanti from the FMRIP in Oxford. So they basically used a classic unit deep learning architecture, and they calculated a weighted sum of dice loss and cross entropy. So what made us really intrigued by this algorithm was that it was based on ventricle and gray matter distance maps. So they did a segmentation of the white matter internal of the T1 images internally to have a more informed input data sets based on anatomy. And so they then used 3 networks based on axial, sagittal, and coronal slices, basically making it a 2.5D, not 3D unit architecture. And of course, we used the lesion prediction algorithm from the lesion segmentation toolbox of FSPM from Paul Smith's dissertation at the LMU Munich. And so that one is based on classical classification, based on binary regression with spatially varying intercepts. And the initial training data included the generation of lesion belief maps from a combination of hyperintense values following gray matter subtraction, along with tissue probability maps of the white matter. We attempted to use the most current version of the IdeaLab UC Davis white matter hyperintensity kit, basically for historical reasons, but we had to include it from exclude it from our comparison mostly due to the poor performance. Mainly what happened is the white matter hyperintensity kit does a segmentation of the T1 weighted anatomical image, which failed in many of our scans. So it was not actually the FLAIR segmentation that failed, but the T1 segmentation, probably because their T1 segmentation was geared on some different contrast than the MP ranges that we typically put in right now. And so all of this led to an overwhelming amount of false positives in especially non-white matter regions and outside of the brain. Also, we chose not to investigate Bianca because we only wanted to have algorithms that do not need to be manually retrained, because otherwise you would get, if you manually retrain, you will get a data set bias. And so our final algorithms that we compare is the PGS from MICAI, the Cysomedia 2 from MICAI, FMRIP TrueNet from the MICAI, and the standard LPA from SPM. Now, our preliminary results, just looking at the general volume of the segmentation algorithms for the different fat status on or fat sat off. So the cool thing about the test data set from the MICI is it provides manual ground truth segmentations. And so we can clearly see that the subjects from the white matter hyperintensity challenge had a median burden of 10 to 17 milliliters right here. That is considered really a heavier burden. Now, the RAD subjects are generally healthy older adults with hypertension and an elevated risk of developing dementia, but are presenting with normal cognition. So we expected a lighter white matter hyperintensity burden compared to the MICI challenge. So if we look at the RAD subjects, they are in between 3 and 4 milliliters. That seems to be the case. And for HIPEC, we expected to have even a less burden because we even have the normotensive subjects in that group. And we end up with a median between 2 and 3 milliliters of whole volume. But for HIPEC, we observed a high false positive rate in the SISO-media 2 segmentation right here. So it seems to be that so we found these hyperintense regions of the gray matter at the front due to the coil effect misled SISO-media, while these other ones kind of were immune to it for the most part. So LPA almost always selects the posterior. For scans without fat saturation, LPA seems to have a higher false positive rate. So if we look at LPA right here, this is very comparable, but for the fat saturation off, LPA is clearly higher than the manual segmentation. And also in our RAD cohort, we can see that LPA has a higher median volume. And that probably is due to that LPA almost always selects the posterior attachment of the septum pellucidum as white matter hyperintensity, especially on occasions of thicker epidermal layers in the regions of the attachment of the septum pellucidum. Now, if we look at average images again of the different segmentation algorithms of the test data set, this is probably too small to see on the screen right now. So let's zoom in a bit on. So we have the different scanners right here with the different sequences, and we have manual segmentation, SPM, UC Davis, PGS, SISO-media 2, and FMRIP2. So if we zoom in on this little corner right here, we can clearly, first of all, see all these false positives in the UC Davis white matter hyperintensity kit, which doesn't have to do with white matter hyperintensities, but with the failed T1 segmentation. Looking at SPM right here, you can always clearly see the posterior septum pellucidum right here being selected as a white matter hyperintense region in comparison to the manual selection where that's not present. Then the next, let's look at the deep learning algorithms right here. Again, even if we zoom in like that, we cannot see much. So let's just focus on these top ones right here. If we zoom in here, we can clearly see that PGS kind of like does even a better selection than the manual because it's highly focal. It finds all of these smaller ones, while these are kind of blurry for the manual segmentation. This is just due to the fact that drawing all of these small little deep white matter lesions is very laborious, and we found quite a lot missing in the manual segmentation. But PGS was actually really nicely able to pick those up. And of course, you can see that they did not select the attachment of the septum pellucidum right there. And going looking at the different contrast right here. Overall, again, you see the white matter hyperintensity kit still is better for those, but still has quite a lot of false positives right here. But if we look at the fat saturation off, it's really interesting. It actually does a pretty good job if we ignore that it selects the skin around the skull, which you can actually scrub out really easily. It actually doesn't do a too bad job in comparison to, also, but that seems to be the case also for the UCD white matter hyperintensity kit, that they also select the attachment of the ligamentum back there. And looking at the deep white matter, again, yeah, this is it looks pretty good on the first glance, but it's really, really, really difficult to actually figure out which one is better or not, just looking at the average image. So we now need to go, we figured we need to go at a single subject level to see, like, okay, how do these fare? And for this, I have a little exercise for you all. And I have a couple of segmentations right here from the different algorithms. And if Stephanie is so kind, take a little look at those images. And once you're ready, use the poll to enter your choice of which algorithm actually did the best right here. Give you a couple minutes.
Okay, we're at 44% of the people answered. Maybe we can get a couple more. Right.
Interesting. So we see it's not that easy. So choice 1, 2, and 3 is kind of out. No one picked it, but choice 4, 5, and 6 are actually pretty decent. What with choice 6 winning the ball here, and this kind of demonstrates that it's really not such a easy case to select the best algorithm to do this. And in order to figure this out, we created a subset of 120 scans from RAD and HYPAC, which was comprised of a diverse set of 2D and 3D images with and without fat saturations, high and low motions, high, medium, and low white matter hyperintensity burden, so that we have like all the different cases in these 120 test scans. And then I let 3 independent blinded raters score the individual segmentations on a scale from 1 to 6. So these were trained students of the lab. And 1 is the best algorithm and 6 is the worst algorithm for each scan. So all scans and segmentations were double randomized for each rater, so that everything was blinded and there was just no a sequence to anything that they could figure out which algorithm is which. And the results, if we look at the manual scoring here, for UCD versus LPA, it kind of like UCD, of course, that's what we kind of expected because it's the oldest. Most of the raters rated, so it's the 3 raters, 3, 4, and 6. So these 3 raters voted UCD worst of the algorithms, and LPA, well, not worst, but kind of second worst. And if we look at the deep learning algorithms, so it seems like PGS always scores between 1, 2, and 3. FMRIP TrueNet, also 1, 2, and 3, and Media, well, maybe 4 or 3, kind of like in the middle of the field. So if we sum all of this up, we get this graph, which you read as the smaller bars is the better segmentation, so better perceived segmentation. So what we see here, PGS is the lowest between all 3 raters, but closely followed by FMRIP TrueNet. And Media is 3rd for sure. And then it's kind of a little bit of a toss-up between LPA and UCD. So it's clearly to see that the deep learning approaches outperformed all of the classical approaches, and PGS is kind of the winner of this comparison. So that brings us to the challenges and future directions. So T2 FLAIR images without fat saturations were underrepresented in the MICAI training set. And the combination of the 2 contrasts into one data set, so having images with fat saturation, images without fat saturations, to train the classifiers might lead to a potential bias, because the images are, the image contrast is just so different. And subjects within the MICAI challenge presented with a rather heavy white matter hyperintensity burden, potentially biasing classifiers to overestimate white matter hyperintensity burden for subjects with a low white matter hyperintensity burden. And all scans of the MICAI challenge use 2D sequences, meaning relatively thick slices. And so it's unknown how this will impact the segmentation of more modern 3D sequences where you have like isotropic voxels. And subject motion ringing artifacts might potentially pose as false positive hyperintensities, where we really don't know the effect of. And white matter hyperintensity distribution, shape, and longitudinal tracking are more likely to be sensitive biomarkers than the volume alone. And so there are open questions that we're still investigating, which is the white matter hyperintensity for different tissue types. So we really want to look at the difference between white matter hyperintensity in white matter in general, but also, again, the difference between periventricular white matter, deep white matter, gray matter, CSF, and outside of the brain. Now, we tried to do that using free surfer segmentations from T1, but we ran into a lot of issues on average with the free surfer segmentations. That we started to manually scrub the free surfer T1 segmentations. We have a free surfer 6.0 segmentation, we have a free surfer 7.2 segmentation, and we have a free surfer 7.43, the newest segmentation. And all 3 of these different segmentations have their own specific problems that we, for statistical comparisons of these different tissue types, we just could not use them. And that posed a huge problem, so that we're now currently switching to probabilistic tissue maps that I calculated based on the RAD 420 standard space that I created, which will give us a more probabilistic estimation of the location of these white matter hyperintensities. And then we also need to investigate the impact of data quality, motion, and ringing artifacts. And very recently, just at the beginning of this year, so too late to include in this comparison, FreeSurfer released the white matter hyperintensity synth-sec algorithm, which is a deep learning-based algorithm. And the lesion segmentation toolbox group released LST-AI, which is basically the newest version of the lesion segmentation algorithm, completely re-engineered based on deep learning with over 500 subjects as a training data set, which is highly interesting, but was just released this February. And yeah, so we couldn't include this in this comparison yet. And with that, I say that's all. And are there questions?
You can feel free to unmute yourself, or you can put your question in the chat if you'd prefer. Oh, here's one in the chat.
What is the clinical significance of deep versus periventricular white matter hyperintensity? Why differentiate? Yeah, that's a very good question. So there has been some evidence. Let me get to this slide. No, this one. There has been some evidence that the periventricular white matter hyperintensity is a lot more predictive of cognitive decline than deep white matter hyperintensity. But as we've seen, especially the older algorithms like LPA and the white matter hyperintensity kit completely underestimate the deep white matter hyperintensity regions. And so it's unclear if this is actually true. So this is probably quite true, but if there is such a stark difference between those two, it's not quite clear yet, because all of these algorithms kind of underestimated those deep white matter hyperintensities until we just recently got the deep learning based algorithms from the MICAI challenge, and probably now also the LSTAI and FreeSurfer WMH SynStack. Does that answer the question?
Yes, thank you.
Of course. Any other questions?
All right, another one in the chat. What is the clinical significance of T2 FLAIR with versus without fat saturation? Why differentiate?
Yeah, that's not really clear. Let me go to that slide. So you can see like that the contrast is very different with and without fat saturation, and it's kind of a some groups prefer with fat saturation, some groups prefer without fat saturation. There is a clinical significance for using the fat saturation, but from my experience, the problem with the fat saturation is that you always also get hyper intense gray matter if you have the fat saturation on. And those vanish if you have fat saturation off. So what happens if you do the segmentation on images like that, you very easily get false positives in the gray matter, because the gray matter itself is already brighter than the white matter itself. So differentiating between the difference of this brightness or this brightness and this brightness is challenging for segmentation algorithms. That's why I would, from experience, prefer always doing no fat saturation. But as my background is computational, there are probably better answers looking at the underlying anatomy.
All right, another in the chat. Which of these algorithms would you recommend using for the MADC dataset based on these analyses? Would it be PGS?
Yes. So, I mean, because the RAD study was recently concluded and we're now doing the final outcome analysis, we, with these results, we opted using the PGS. Now, I cannot say whether the LSTAI new algorithms or the SynthSec FreeSurfer algorithm might even be better than PGS. So even the FreeSurfer one currently even is impossible to download because they have some kind of conflicts of their libraries in the background. But the LSTAI is downloadable, and from reading the paper, this seems to be very, very solid. implementing the PGSU, it's kind of a little bit tricky because you need to like run it in a Docker environment and prepare your data in a specific way. But yeah, so we opted for PGS. Going forward, I would maybe wait a little bit to decide what to use for the UMAP data. Probably I have a hunch that the LST-AI might be very, very good, but that's just from reading the paper, not actually looking at some outcomes.
All right, another question. If an article does not specify fat saturation, is it safe to assume analysis with fat saturation was not done?
Oh, that's a tough question. I am not sure. It's basically a toss-up. They should specify whether fat saturation is done or not. Hopefully you can tell by the example images. I mean, you can see here if you look at the contrast, it's very different, and you would tell from a sample image. If there is no brain image in the whole paper, I'm not sure if I would assume either way. Then I would probably contact the authors if it's important.
Hey Norman, I have a
Yeah.
question.
Yeah, hi.
Great talk.
Thank you.
So I was wondering for the comparison that you did, and you decided to do a qualitative sort of comparison by looking at them and rating them.
Yes.
So why did you decide to do a qualitative comparison and not a quantitative one, where you either use the already manual segmented images, or where you would do your manual yourself and then sort of do like a whatever dice overlap or something with sort of your gold standard?
Very, very good question. That's why all of this took so long, because of course I tried to do it quantitatively in the beginning. But what happened was that so first of all, quantitatively, all the MICHI algorithms were already done on the pre-segmented test data set. So that's how we got the ranking in the MICHI test data set. So I didn't need to repeat that. Then we tried for like half a year to create our own ground truth segmentation, again with a few different manual segmentators. But what we ended up with was, after like 3 or 4 months of segmentation, the manual segmentations were so different that we couldn't decide on which one was actually the best. And we decided it would have taken so much time to manually actually come up with a conclusion on these manual segmentation, because the devil is in the details. Like because you have like these gradients forming a consent on what these gradients actually are, where to put the border is highly speculative. So and at that point we decided we're not going to go down that road, because the inter-rater variance was just too big. And it was a lot easier to train raters to just rate the segmentation instead of doing it themselves. As you can see here, even though there is some inter-rater variance, the results are highly correlated between the different raters. And so that's why I personally trust this data a lot more than the manual segmentations that we did.
All right, looks like there's another question in the chat along with some thank yous. Would you ever combine WMHs across data sets? If so, how would you do this? For example, would you turn the WMHs into z-scores and then combine data sets?
Yes, yeah, exactly. So comparing across data sets, if you have different different contrasts and different sequences, might lead to different errors. Like if you compare a 2D sequence with a 3D sequence, you might get completely different results. So comparing these is really difficult if you look at the volumes. Yeah, I mean, transforming them into z-scores is a good start. But overall, if you compare across data sets, yeah, you really have to be careful to look at the different scanning parameters and how closely they align with each other, and what kind of biases you might get. There are quite a lot.
Right, another one. Is there a difference between WMHs and, oh goodness,
Eukaryosis?
yeah,
Yeah.
that's it.
Actually, as far as I know, as being a computer scientist, I've seen these two terms used interchangeably, basically stating that they're the same, but I might stand corrected.
Hey, I have a quick question. Hey,
Yeah.
nice to meet you. So on the fat versus no fat sat, you showed the. Can you pull up those images again?
Oh, yeah.
It just looked to my eye like the sort of, yeah. So the sort of the gray matter enhancement that you're talking about seems kind of greater in B than in A. I'm just trying to understand that. Or what's the difference again between the
Oh,
two?
yeah. So the difference is, so for A, this is the average image from the fat saturation on in the MICHI challenge, and this is from our HYPAC clinical trial, the average image. So basically here I'm comparing how well on average these contrasts align between the different data sets. And yeah, we definitely see that's a problem with the sequence we used in the HYPAC data set, that the gray matter, especially if in the front right here, is oversaturated a lot. And yeah, but that's something I discovered after the fact, because the sequence was already set in stone when I arrived. And what we also can see here is the difference that the actual white matter hyperintensity burden, what you typically see at the posterior horn right here of the ventricle, is a lot less in the HYPAC study compared to the MICHI study, and that's what we really expect. So that makes sense. But yeah, so we found that having the fat saturation on sometimes lead. I mean, you can even see this in a little bit in the MICHI data set, that it leads to the gray matter being still hyper intense, and that throws off some segmentation algorithms, having more false positives in the gray matter, while in the fat saturation off, the gray matter is not, well, maybe here a little bit, but overall is not so pronounced against the white matter, so that it would lead to false positives.
I see. And then the scans in A versus B, were they, acquired on different sites and different scanners?
Yes, yes, very different sites, very different scanners. So those are from the MICHI challenge. Let me go back. So with fat saturation on. So this is, so the left, so A is comprised out of these 30 scans from the Siemens, 30 scans from the GE, 10 scans from the Philips here, and 10 scans from the 1.5 GE here. While this one is just from one of our studies. So all of these were 2D scans, though, while this is a 3D scan.
Oh, okay. Very interesting. Okay, thank you.
Yep, sure.
All right, another question in the chat. Do you know if the HYPIC trial lowered blood pressure with medication alone, or used diet and exercise as well, such as with the RAD trial?
Yeah, so it was medication alone. Yes, HYPAC was just working with medication alone. There was no exercise part and a dietary part to this one. Thank you so much.
All right, if we don't have any other questions, I guess we'll wrap things up a couple minutes early and give you all an extra 4 minutes to lunch, right? Thank you so much for coming out today. Be sure to fill out the Qualtrics evaluation so we know what topics people are looking to learn more about. Our next Leaders Initiative seminar is July 22nd, so keep your eyes open for that. And we'll see you all next time. Thank you so much.
Thank you all.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.